In this video, we're going to add a few nodes to our dialog in order to handle more complex interactions with the user. Consider this scenario. A user is asking for flower recommendations for their partner on Valentine's Day. We might want to ask about the partner's gender and based on that information offer specific flower suggestions. Asking follow-up questions to determine a proper response is a very common scenario, and the user tends to see this behavior as an indication that the bot understands them and the conversation that is taking place. How do you determine which questions need a follow-up question and which don't? That's a business decision. You can implement this in a text file, on paper, as a table, or even as a mind map. What matters is that it's clear to you which responses are needed for which questions, and when a request for more information is needed, to provide an accurate response. You want to have a clear picture before you translate this into nodes in your dialog. That's why before creating this chatbot course, I created a table representing all the questions, follow-up questions, and responses I wanted our chatbot to give. These rules are somewhat arbitrary, but they are inspired by the flower industry, and they intentionally include some more complex scenarios to show you how to handle them in your own chatbot. We'll start by asking the gender question for Valentine's Day, then provide recommendations according to the response. We do the same for graduation. For get well, we want to know if the sick person is in the hospital, because flowers or plants that are okay in a home setting might not be in an hospital setting. Next, we'll deal with a complex question that can have a second follow-up question after the first follow-up question. When someone asks for flowers for an anniversary, we need to establish whether this is for a couple they know or for their own partner. So we ask if it's for their own anniversary. If they say no, it means that it's for another couple. So we recommend a cheerful bouquet or houseplant. If they say yes, we want to know the gender of their partner, since in our made-up scenario, it's a determining factor for the flower recommendations. Finally, in the next video, we'll discover a problem when testing the bot. And we'll fix it by handling the scenario in which the user wants flower suggestions, but they haven't specified either a special occasion or relationship. But let's move one step at a time. How do we go about handling that Valentine's Day gender follow-up question? Let's take our chat-first approach and type in, "I'd like flower suggestions for Valentine's Day." Write intent, write entity, but no response. This is because we matched the entity condition of simple occasion, but that node doesn't have a response with the Valentine's Day entity value as its condition. So we need a new node dedicated to Valentine's Day. Now the question becomes, do we place it above or below the simple occasion node? The occasion entity condition is quite general. If we place the node below it, it will be overshadowed by this more generic node, since execution proceeds top to bottom and stops when the first match is found. So we need to place it above simple occasion suggestions. As I mentioned before, as a general rule, you want nodes with specific conditions that could be matched by more generic nodes to be above, say, generic nodes. We select relationship suggestions and click Add Node to add a node just above simple occasion suggestions. We can call the node something like Valentine's gender question. Note that apostrophes are not allowed in the name of the node. For the condition, we want the Valentine's Day entity value. And for the response, we want to ask a follow-up question. So after we ask the question, what do? We usually wait for the user to reply. So the next step is to wait for the user's response. So we'll just leave wait for user input at the bottom of the node. Now we need to add a child node to handle the user response to our gender question. We can call the node suggestions by gender and add as a node condition gender. We want this condition in place because the user could technically answer with an irrelevant reply. We only want this node to be executed if the user has given us male, female, or non-binary gender answers. Next, we will add a different Valentine's Day flower suggestion for each of the three gender values. Let's close our node and test again. This time we ask for gender in the Valentine's gender question node. When we reply a gender, Watson identifies it as a gender non-binary value. Since the entity matches the condition of the child node, that node is executed and the corresponding response for non-binary is returned to the user. It worked as expected. By the way, I prepared these responses ahead of time. It pays off to do the same for your own chatbot, rather than trying to come up with the right response wording every time you create a new node. So anytime you are creating a chatbot, take some time before to come up with a list of questions that you want your chatbot to address. That's the scope of the chatbot. And the responses that you want the chatbot to provide to the user. You can then just copy and paste the responses you created into the nodes as you implement the chatbot. Next, let's handle the flowers for a graduate scenario. Much like before with the simple occasion node. So let's create a new node. The condition, occasion graduation, is just as specific as occasion Valentine's Day. So it will need to go above simple occasion. However, it's not any less or more specific, so it doesn't really matter whether we place it above or below the Valentine's node. Nothing new here. We are essentially doing the same as we did for Valentine's Day. In fact, we're also going to add a child node to handle the gender response from the user. As you can see, node names are unique, so we need to rename the node to something unique. This gives us the opportunity to make the node name more specific. We opted to provide the same flower recommendations for female and non-binary people receiving graduation flowers. So we'll need to specify an OR condition for this particular response. When we test again in the Try It Out panel, this time we are asked a follow-up question about gender. When we reply female, we receive the chosen recommendation for graduation flowers aimed at a female receiver. And while we're here, why not? For the sake of consistency, let's change the name of the Suggestions by Gender node for Valentine's Day as well. Now let's test Get Well recommendations. Again, it looks like we need a node to handle this. You know the drill by now. What's different here is that the question is about the location of the patient, rather than the gender. We don't have an entity for location, but we can ask if the user is in the hospital, and then use the response types as the entity to determine whether they are at the hospital. In this child node, we'll play safe by treating both yes and uncertain as if the flower receiver was in the hospital. As we test again in the Try It Out panel, this time we ask the hospital follow-up question. When we answer not sure or yes, we're told that odorous flowers are not recommended in hospital settings and therefore a more appropriate recommendation is made. The intent in follow-up questions doesn't matter here, since we are basing our decisions on entities. But it doesn't hurt to train Watson by marking as irrelevant the answers that are classified with fairly generic intents, such as goodbyes. As we make this change, as we expected, Watson is training. Let's test the anniversary recommendation. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead and just show you what I created already, rather than go through the process of showing you every single step. By now you know how to create a node, how to create a child node, how to set a condition on the node, and so on. As you can see, I created a node which has a child node, and I used the child node to create a grandchild node. In the parent node, executed only when the user requested flower recommendations for anniversary, we ask the user if it's their anniversary. In the child node, we check the response to see whether it's positive or negative. Uncertainty in this case doesn't really apply. If the user answers no to the questions of whether it's their anniversary, we can assume that the flowers are for another couple. So we go with a flower recommendation that is not overly romantic. If the user answers yes, we ask them for the gender of their partner and then wait for their input. So we add a final node which handles this other user response. When we are on this node in a conversation, we know three things. We know that the user wanted flower suggestions, that they wanted them for their anniversary, and we know the gender of their partner. We have all the information that we need to provide specific recommendations. In the next video, we'll do something akin to what programmers call integration testing, by trying a complete conversation with a chatbot. As we do so, we'll address one common final scenario that we haven't addressed so far. We'll also explore how to export and import chatbots in Watson Conversation.